back on the Zero Hour. I'm your host, Richard RJ Eskow. Imran Khan is a former world celebrity. He is the former prime minister of Pakistan, still very much a leading figure there and in the world community. He has just joined us from giving an address to his nation of Pakistan, and we wanted to speak to him about that and a number of other issues involving his country, his plans, and the world situation overall. So without any further ado, Imran Khan, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Richard.
You have just finished addressing your nation, sir, and thank you for joining us immediately after that. What did you speak to the nation about exactly?
Well, Richard, my country is going through a terrible time right now. We have really been taken over by a bunch of certified crooks. 61% of our cabinet is on bail on corruption cases. And what they are doing is that they have basically violated all fundamental rights of our citizens. And my party members have been through a terrible time. We have false cases registered against us. Senior members have been tortured, custodial torture. There have been a spate of cases where our people have been picked up and they've disappeared and they've been brought back traumatized. And this total violation of our human rights. So we decided that we would start a campaign about filling up the jails in Pakistan. So our campaign is that we are going to flood the jails of this country in protest at what they're doing, not just violating our fundamental rights, but they're also violating the Constitution. My party was holding two out of the 4 provinces. My party was governing 2 of the provinces. And so we dissolved our 2 governments. And the Constitution is very clear that in 90 days from the time you dissolve your governments, there have to be elections. But unfortunately, because these bunch of crooks are petrified of elections, because since my party has been out of power in April 22, out of the 36 by-elections, we have swept 29 of them, despite all the government machinery against us. So they're scared of the popularity of the party and they're running away from the elections. But in doing that, they're violating the Constitution. Because after 90 days, it means that the Constitution has been abrogated. Mm-hmm. And so the campaign has 2 points, this filling up the jails. One is the violation of fundamental rights, including the violation of the Constitution. And secondly, we are facing the worst ever inflation in our history. And people, the salaried class is being crushed. So really, it is these 2 reasons why we started our campaign today.
Well, that's a major announcement, and of course, campaigns like this have a long and distinguished history in your part of the world. Before the creation of Pakistan, Mr. Gandhi and Mr. Jinnah were involved in such things, weren't they? These were, correct me if I'm wrong on my history, but this principle, which Martin Luther King later adopted in the southern United States, was civil disobedience to take nonviolent action against the system. That's what comes to mind for me. Was that what you were thinking in formulating this strategy?
Absolutely, Richard. The idea is to have a non-violent campaign, where it's a peaceful protest. So therefore, you don't cause any damage to your society. It's also, a way of avoiding violence from our state. We did peaceful protests before. One was on the 25th of May, 22. And the violence our people faced in that protest, thousands were put into jail. There were police jumping into people's houses in the middle of the night and picking up people and taking them to jails, and then they've suffered torture. 2 of our people got killed. So therefore, we decided that rather than have a violent campaign, which would actually be a disaster for Pakistan, because our economy right now is in an extremely precarious position. So therefore, we decided this non-violent option.
So, and let me ask you, since you mentioned the persecution that and difficulties that some members of your party have gone through, just for anyone who might be listening to this here in the States, who might not know, you were prime minister. You were removed from office as a result of some, I don't know what you call them, machinations or arrangements or what have you, certain members leaving your party and so on. And we could talk about that a bit, but following your you were leaving office. You were injured in an assassination attempt later that year, I believe October. Is that correct? And there's an interesting question I have for you about that, sir, because first of all, the articles that I've read from the Pakistani press, they say that in the U.S., when we talk about the assassinations of famous people in the 1960s, there's a lone gunman theory comes up, right? That it was one person acting. And it seems to me almost as if the stories have suggested that it was one disgruntled individual who managed to somehow get his hands on a rather expensive handgun. But I watched the videos of the shootings, sir, and it seems to me that it looked like automatic weapon fire to me. It did not look to me like handgun fire, which raises a number of questions. First question is, how are you now? Are you well? Are you recovering? Are you? I know people would want to know that.
Well, Richard, first of all, my government was removed through a conspiracy. I mean, it wasn't removed through what you would say a normal democratic process where suddenly your members lose confidence in your government. Because my government, at the time I was removed, we had the best economic performance of a government in the last 17 years. And that's despite 2 years of COVID-19. And we were the top 3 countries that dealt with the COVID crisis. I mean, Pakistan was given as an example, which handled it the best. So our economy was performing better than it was in 17 years. We had, record performances of exports, our tax collection, our growth rate was 6%. So at that time, the government was removed, not because some members, backbenchers were disgruntled. It was because they were paid over $1 million per member of parliament. They were bought. And a whole lot of people were involved, the opposition, the government, the people who are in government right now. Remember these, I just need to, people who don't understand, the people who are involved, I repeat, 61% of them are on bail or corruption cases. They are the ones who now use this dirty money to buy our members. But not just them, our ex-army chief was completely involved with the conspiracy. In fact, he played the most important role. And that's how it was removed. And what happened afterwards, there was a huge outpouring of public support for my government. So it's something that has never happened in this country before. We had hundreds and thousands of people coming out in the streets protesting the next day when my government was removed. And what happened subsequently was that we had series of by-elections over the next 6-7 months. And my party swept the by-elections. 75% of them were won by us. So what happened was that these people in power and the handlers who from behind the scenes who got scared that, I would get back into power because the elections are scheduled this year. So they then tried to... they plotted to have me assassinated. Now, this was the assassination attempt. I had predicted it. I had, in fact, gone on media saying that they would use this idea of a lone gunman, some religious extremist, who had shot me. And but I had predicted it because they first started this campaign. They used a fake video of apparently me sort of being disrespectful to my religion. They used that, to build up the campaign. And then I predicted that this is what they were going to use, a gunman who would supposedly an extremist. But actually, it was again a campaign planned by the people, the three people I nominated. One was a senior member of our intelligence agency, the Prime Minister, and the Interior Minister. Both the Prime Minister and Interior Minister have a track record of extrajudicial killing when they were in power before. There's an Amnesty International report about the current Prime Minister of having had people killed through police encounters. And there was a whole report. So, and then there was a massacre called the Model Town Massacre, where there were 14 people shot dead in daylight, broad daylight, 60 people getting bullet injuries through police action. And again, these two people were involved. And so they were behind it. And when the incident happened, I was very lucky that this young man, he actually put his hand on as he saw him take the gun out, he put his hand on it. And rather than hitting the bullets hitting me on my top body, they ended up hitting me and the others on their legs. So I had 3 bullets in my legs. And then subsequently, the investigation found out there were 3 shooters. And unfortunately, that record, because the people who were involved in the assassination attempt against me are still in power, so therefore they have tried to sabotage the investigation. But there were 3 shooters, and my 2 bullet wounds on the upper part of my leg healed, but the one that hit me in the low part broke my bone. That bone is healing, and I hope to be recovered in a couple of weeks' time.
And of course, you having been an athlete, I imagine you feel the loss of complete function even more. And along those lines, you've had quite a busy week, sir, because on Monday you were appearing in court on the matter of bail for charges against you. And, we should talk about those. But from what I saw and heard, for someone who has an injury to his leg, among other things, it looked as if you perhaps had to walk here and there. And I read that they denied the request for a Zoom hearing instead, and so on. So aside from the charges, which we can talk about, why did it transpire exactly in that way, do you think?
Well, the 2 charges I appeared in court for, by the way, there are 70 cases instituted against me right now. So I've been appearing in courts before too, one case after another. But these 2 cases which I appeared, I just need to tell your viewers. One is there's a terrorism case against me, and that is there was a demonstration outside the Election Commission when they disqualified me. I wasn't even in the demonstration, and for that they instituted a terrorism case, which is which obviously it's a joke. And secondly, there was another case which on a report, it's not even the report hasn't even got the input of my side or my party side. On that report, they had a warrants for my address on that, which the High Court has thrown that away. So this was by the Election Commission. The High Court considered a report. So the High Court doesn't think of this as an authentic report because our side hasn't come through. And on that, they still had a case against me of warrants for my arrest. So that's why I went to get bail. And the courts wanted a physical appearance. And my own worry was that, my leg still hasn't fully healed. And after resting for 3.5 months, the last thing I want to do is that just when it's about to heal, I didn't want to knock on the leg because I've got an election campaign ahead of me, and a knock any chance of a jerk or a knock would actually open up the wound again. So that's why I was being careful.
And well, you mentioned you have an election campaign ahead. My understanding is that the election commission or whatever body it is has ruled that you personally cannot run for office for 5 years. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. You see, the election commission, unfortunately, is a part of the ruling party. It's so blatantly biased. There are various decisions they've given against my party, and all of them have been set aside by the courts. So when it goes to court, they set it aside. And this too, they banned me, and then it was set aside by the court. It's so blatantly biased. So no, I can contest elections.
Oh, okay. Well, I hope we get to your plans before we're done, but I'd like to, if I may, pivot a little bit because, here in the United States, we get not nearly enough information about Pakistan and the people involved there, I would say, given that it's the world's fifth most populous country and, of strategic importance and of course of moral importance as well. So I guess one of the questions that I think my audience would have about you personally, sir, is I'm sure most of them know that here is a man who was famous and wealthy and successful quite young as a cricket star, and I think before you entered politics, I would suspect your image in this country was something of, forgive me for putting it this way, but a playboy kind of international celebrity. And I think, with quite a nice life in London, I suppose, or somewhere in the UK. And, I guess people might be wondering how it is that someone with what many people would consider a great life, of no public responsibility, of comfort, of, how one transitions from that to a situation of enormously hard work, which politics is, of risk, of, attacks of various kinds. Is there a way we can help my audience understand how you transitioned from, I know you're one individual, but from that person as we understood him to the person today?
Well, Richard, look, from a sportsman who never thought that he would ever end up in politics, last thing as a sportsman, I thought I'd go to politics because politics never interested me. The idea of going around and asking for votes. I mean, normal people are not like that. If you have everything you have in life, why would you want to go around begging for votes? And, so the whole life, I was interested in politics as a subject, specifically international relations. But actually, the idea of being a politician never interested me. But, what happens, in our lives, sometimes along the way, we ask ourselves the question, that what is the purpose of existence? That what happens to me once I die? So, once you ask these questions, the only answer lies in the spiritual world, because science has no answer to these questions, or the material world cannot answer these questions. So that's how, from not being particularly a religious person or a spiritual person is a better way of putting it, I ended up sort of on this completely different path, which I imagined I would be taking in life. So from there onwards, the more you go on the spiritual world, the more your direction in life changes. So from being, a sportsman's life, a sportsman's worldview is very different because it's like, there are no second prizes. For losing a match, you don't have any prize. There's not much compassion in your life.
Right.
If you have too much compassion, you cannot have that cutthroat competition, when you compete at the international level. So from there, it went the other way, where the spiritual life means that you have a responsibility to the society. So as being someone who was more privileged than anyone else in my country and who had more love and respect than anyone else, so then I started, first building the only cancer hospital in this country, a charity hospital, because people can't afford cancer treatment. And then build a second hospital. Then also build a university, again charity for underprivileged. And then I'm on my now second university. So, and then it went into politics. The reason why politics was because I wanted to have a welfare state, a state that takes care of its people. And secondly, rule of law. These were the two things that drove me into politics. Because, the first state built by our holy prophet, Muhammad, peace be upon him, he built the first state in Medina. And that for all Muslims was the ideal state, what we consider the golden age of the Muslim history. And he built that state on these two principles. It was the first ever welfare state in the history of mankind, and it had rule of law. Everyone was equal before law. So that was my motivation, really, for going into politics.
And I'm glad you mentioned Islam, because I think that also there's a conception of, as we all know, of Islam in the West that's been shaped by media, that's been shaped by conflict, that's been shaped by extremism and so on. And, the Muslim history that I've read suggests that, it was in fact a social welfare state, if you will. But that aspect, and the spiritual, you might say, rather than the religious or structural, hardly authoritarian. I mean, as I understand it, even in the Prophet's time, there were shura, there were councils, there was, it was not by any means authoritarian. If this is a model, how should people in a country like mine view that? In other words, in my country, for example, Bernie Sanders is very popular, and I worked for Bernie, and he was very much an advocate of national community, of a social welfare state, of political democracy, of so on. And while he's not overtly a member of any religion per se, very spiritual in his own way, a great admirer of spiritual leaders like Pope Francis when he speaks about poverty and so on. So how should people like that view, let's say, a movement like yours?
Look, Richard, there are two worldviews. One is the material, what some of capitalists say that, it's greed that drives the world. And so because there's greed, you make more and more profits, and eventually it trickles down to the people. That's one worldview. The other is the spiritual worldview, where you feel that the reason you're different to the animal world, humans are different to animals for two reasons only. In human community, there is justice. In animal world, there is might is right. In human community, there is compassion. In animal kingdom, there is survival of the fittest. So we differ to the animal world. And our religion, our book, the Holy Quran, tells us that, human was God's greatest creation. But it says that, when a human is human, he rises above the angels. But when he falls, he goes below the level of animals. Because animals don't have greed. Humans have insatiable greed. So human can fall below the level of the animals. So therefore, simple way of explaining to people is that societies that have compassion, in my view, are spiritual. Societies that care about justice. And justice, why justice? Because justice means the weak need to be protected from the strong. That's why you have rule of law. That's why the more civilized a society, the more rule of law it has. So if you ask me what in the world today is nearer to the Muslim ideal, which countries, I would say the Scandinavian countries. I would actually say New Zealand. I would even say Switzerland, because these countries basically have the most important thing for a civilized society, which is compassion and justice. Unfortunately, societies where you encourage greed, this is the problem of the world right now. The environmental problems in the world are simply because of naked greed, where humans never have enough. And unfortunately, with the spirituality diminishing in the world gradually, I'm saying over a few hundred years, the spiritual sense, the spiritual world has been restricted. Actually, in a way, it has been replaced by what I call the environmental movement or the green movement, or the climate change movement. It's people caring for other people. Whereas on the other side are these, people who never have enough, naked greed.
This may be a bit parenthetical or perhaps not, but I've read some of the history of Islam and of Muhammad and the stories, the hadith, the stories about him. The first one I read when I opened a book was randomly, which stunned me in a way, was a story about the Prophet telling someone that when they wash themselves ritually in water, not to waste the water, even if it's in a running river, which to me suggests, the river's fine either way, but it suggests that an attitude of the human being towards nature is one of respect and non-wastefulness. And it seems to me that's that's related to what you're saying, perhaps, is it?
Well, planting a tree, according to the Holy Prophet, if you plant a tree, you will always, what is the word now? The Almighty will bless you, because everyone who benefits from that tree which you planted, even after you die, it will be counted as you will be blessed because of that. So, the emphasis on environment, there's a verse in the Quran which specifically says, tread softly on this world. Tread softly on this world. So, do not leave this big footprint on the world. Respect nature. His whole life was that of not extravagance. He lived even when, he started from very few followers, and then just before the end of his life, he became the master of the whole of Arabia, and riches were flowing in from everywhere. But he never changed his lifestyle. He lived very austere, lived according to his needs, and any extra money would go to the poor people. So he set this example of living as a decent human being on this earth. And unfortunately, always in the history of mankind, there was always the struggle between those who tried to live for others and had compassion, and those who lived the animal way of life.
Well, thank you for that answer. And before I let you go, I know that one of the issues facing Pakistan now, in the face of inflation and the terrible floods and so on, there's negotiation over an IMF loan. And my audience understands the IMF. IMF is a United States has a great influence with the IMF and the World Bank and these sorts of institutions. So I guess that leads me to ask, perhaps as a final question, what message would you want to have for people in the United States and perhaps elsewhere in the Western world that dominates these sort of multilateral organizations? What would you like people to take away or think about when they think about Pakistan?
Firstly, I'm just a word about IMF. It's when you mess up your economy, that's when a country needs IMF. So really, we have really mismanaged our country, and not just recently. The last 10 months has been the worst. We really are on our knees right now. These cabal of crooks have bankrupted our country. I mean, we've never experienced these economic conditions in our history. But over the last 30 years, 40 years, there has not been proper economic management. We have allowed to live beyond our means and never concentrated on how to create wealth in this country. And it's a very rich country. So therefore, we are responsible where we have to beg for loans, go to the IMF. But to the US, I think it's very important for the US to understand that, humans crave dignity and respect. The relationships we want, even though one country might be much stronger than the other, much more powerful, much richer, but human beings, relationships must have dignity and respect in them. And even when, say, US in the past has been good to our countries, I mean, it has given aid to them, and sure, they expect things in return from the countries. But even when countries benefit from the United States, they still want to be treated with respect and dignity. Problem is when we, for instance, I'll just give you an example. We joined the US war on terror after 9/11. And Pakistan ended up losing 80,000 people. We had 80,000 casualties joining the US war. But rather than sympathy coming our way, that look, here is a country which had no terrorist issues in our country. Our country had our issues, but we didn't have suicide attacks and bombs going on everywhere. It simply happened because we joined the US war, and all those opposing the US treated us as collaborators. And they started attacking the state of Pakistan. So when Pakistan was going through this, I would say, extreme suffering, the messages from the US were very disturbing. They were saying that, look, we are paying you to fight. So there was no compassion that, here's a country, 80,000 people. Which ally of the US has given such sort of sacrifices for joining them in their war? I mean, look at the casualties NATO suffered. And here was a country which not only suffered these casualties, but the aid which we got from US was some $20 billion. The country lost over $100 billion in madness that followed. So I think it was this callousness, that this saying that, we are paying you to fight. I think that was what did not go down well in this country. Meanwhile, in the US, the narrative was completely different. They said Pakistan is doing a double dealing and Pakistan is not sincere in its help to the US, not realizing that even if Pakistan wanted to be, there was nothing it could do. There were 3 million Afghan refugees living in Pakistan. So how was Pakistan supposed to check any refugee, because there's constant movement back and forth from Pakistan to Afghanistan? How could Pakistan say which one of them was going to be fighting for the Taliban and who was just going there for trade or livelihood? So in that process, Pakistan really got maligned badly in the US. Meanwhile, in this country, there was a feeling that, look, the US is not at all grateful. In fact, it's treating us like a slave. And I think this is where the misunderstandings and the gulf between the two perceptions grew.
Well, there will be hopefully many people listening to that and hearing that. In conclusion, I guess I would just say that we thank you very much for taking this time. We wish you the best and, a good recovery, and all of those things. And once again, thank you so much for coming on the program.
My pleasure, Richard. Thank you.
And we'll be right back after this. This is the Zero Hour.